The Edmonton Oilers have reached the Stanley Cup final for the first time in 18 years, and it starts on Saturday for some reason. But whatever the case may be, Kirk Day, Matt Pierce, and I are going to have as much coverage as possible coming your way starting now, Oilers fans. So let's start getting to know the Florida Panthers. But before we start, please subscribe to the channel. So, how often does a losing finalist make the Stanley Cup final the next year? You've surely heard that the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy to win in sports, and the reason why isn't that getting over the finish line and winning the Stanley Cup final itself is especially impossible, but it's everything. You've got an 82-game season and then an epic 4-round, potentially 28-game playoff campaign. Each series is an absolute war on its own, and going through the full regular season and playing 4 rounds of playoffs only to come up short and lose in the final is debilitating. Think about it. When was the last time you had a team lose in the Stanley Cup final and reach the final again the following season? If you don't know it off the top of your head, it's actually been a decade and a half since it last happened. And the last time it was Sidney Crosby's first 2 Stanley Cup finals. They lost in 2008 to the Red Wings and then won in 2009 against those very same Red Wings. If you think about some other teams who made surprising runs to the Stanley Cup final in recent years, their following season was more often than not disappointing. Remember, Montreal made the final in 2021 only to finish dead last in the entire NHL the next season, and much like Montreal, the 2012 losing Cup finalist New Jersey Devils missed the playoffs the following year. You take a step back at some other Stanley Cup finals, 2019 St. Louis Blues lost in the first round the next year, as did the 2018 Golden Knights, 2017 Sharks, 2011 Canucks, 2010 Blackhawks. They all followed up a Stanley Cup final appearance with a first-round exit the next season. And all that to say, it's so hard to come so close and then be able to run it back again the next season and do it again. But man, in many ways, in most ways really, Florida have been better this year than last year. Their run to the 2023 Cup final was an underdog story through and through. The team made the playoffs by the skin of their teeth. They turned around a 3-1 first-round deficit against the President's Trophy winners before beating Toronto and beating Carolina. That was 2 teams that were favored to beat them heading into that series. And this year, the team obviously had expectation raised after last postseason. They did a pretty solid job retooling in the summer. They brought in Evan Rodriguez, Dmitry Kulikov, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Nico Mikla, Kevin Stenlund, and Anthony Stolarz all for cheap. And save for a run of 3 straight losses in March, the Panthers consistently remained one of the best teams in the conference, and they ended up surpassing Boston for first in the Atlantic late in the season. So moving on to the Florida Panthers in the playoffs, Florida last season proved to be the wildcard team that everybody had to worry about, and this year it looked like that wildcard team was going to be the Tampa Bay Lightning, and you know what I mean by wildcard team to worry about. It's a team on paper that should be better than 7th or 8th in the conference, but for whatever reason, they sit in that spot and they're sizing up a division winner in the first round. This year it was the Tampa Bay Lightning who had to play Florida, and this marked the 3rd battle of Florida in 4 years, and Tampa Bay not only won the other 2, but Florida only beat Tampa in 2 games in 2021 and 2022, the previous 2 times recently that the 2 teams had played. In truth, the 2 teams played 4 competitive and entertaining games to start this first-round series, but Florida ended up back home with a 3-1 series lead, and they closed things out by way of the only blowout in the series. It was a 6-1 Panther win in Game 5, and after Boston, of course, beat Toronto again, the Panthers and Bruins looked set up for an enthralling playoff rematch in the second round. Boston won Game 1 5-1, but from there, Florida had the Bruins. They won 4 of the next 5. They outscored Boston 18-8 in the last 5 games of the series, and they had their ticket punched very, very assuredly. The New York Rangers awaited Florida in the East Final, and the Panthers, right off the bat, took home ice advantage from New York with a 3-1 Game 1 win at Madison Square Garden, and from there, each of the last 5 games in the series were actually decided by 1 goal, with 3 even going to overtime. Florida won all of the last 3 games, including having to hang on over the finish line while up 2-1 late in Game 6. Edmonton are going to have their hands full with the Panthers. The way I look at the Panthers is that Florida, honestly, are kind of a better version of the Vancouver Canucks in every way. Their forecheck and physicality is unrelenting, and they're getting goals from everywhere. 10 guys on the Panthers have 3 or more goals in these playoffs so far, and you've got that 5-headed monster of Matthew Tkachuk, Alexander Barkov, Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, and Sam Reinhart to deal with at the top of that Panthers forward lineup, and Florida's excellent top 4 of Gus Forsling, Brandon Montour, Nico Mikla, and Aaron Ekblad on the back end will as well be something worth paying attention to moving forward, because as much as every single one of those players are really, really good defensively, they're also pitching in with some points, especially especially that top pairing. Forsling and Montour have already combined for 7 goals and 20 points in 3 rounds. And the last thing that needs mentioning is Sergei Bobrovsky, who's played every minute of the playoffs for the Panthers so far. And if last year's Cup final is any indication, he could only get better from here. He's been superb so far. And finally, last thing I really want to look at with these Florida Panthers is the top 2 centers, Alexander Barkov and Sam Bennett. Do you remember Connor McDavid's struggle to post up any 5-on-5 points against Vancouver thanks to the aggressive line matching of JT Miller staying with him stride for stride? Barkov's basically a better version of JT Miller in almost every way. If the Panthers can slow the superstars of the Oilers down at 5-on-5, then there's only really one thing left for them to do, which is to stay out of the penalty box. Those 2 things happen for Florida, and they're going to have a good chance of winning this series. But speaking of the penalty box, as has been the case in each of Edmonton's first 3 rounds, they have the edge in the special teams battle. Edmonton boasts a 37.3% power play to date and a 93.9% penalty kill. Florida's penalty kill is impressive as well, second to the Oilers at 88.2%, but they only have a 23% power play, so it's safe to say that if the calls start coming in this series, it is going to be advantage Edmonton. In conclusion, I think there's 2 major things here for Edmonton. Number 1 is to continue to take advantage of the special teams edge they've had throughout these playoffs, and number 2 is they have to transition quickly. If they have the puck in their own zone, it needs to be up ice with speed, because you saw the Eastern Conference Final and what it became. It was just Florida just wearing down the Rangers with its forecheck and grind game. So Edmonton has to avoid falling victim to that. It all starts on Saturday for some reason. It starts Saturday in Florida, so thanks for watching this video, and we'll keep the coverage going.